I'm assuming that the intelligence agencies, both public and private, float these things and they see they've got lots of people on the payroll. It's the biggest job program in America, COINTELPRO, 20.0. They float these things and they see what they can get traction and energy by. And they're developed around fear, fear, greed, and the need for emotional satisfaction. The reality is, if you look at what's happening, we're dealing with legal, financial, physical debasement across every aspect of our life.
People are getting the message that reality is not what the corporate media told them it was.
Yeah.
Along with that new awareness, we're seeing major levels of distraction by forces in the mainstream and alternative media, creating these elaborate memes to take that new awareness that people have and steer it into confusion. Now, I've put together a list of some of these memes here, and I'd like to get you to comment on them.
So the first one is, the White Dragon family is rescuing the economy.
Right. This is one of my favorites.
Then there's Kabbalarists are pending, the Alliance for Good are negotiating their surrender.
Right. That one's been going on for quite a while.
That's true, it has been.
There are different versions and variations, but no need to act because it's all about to pop. So you can just lay back and...
Yeah, the elites are being arrested, and there's going to be tribunals where they are put on trial, the cabal will go to jail, and behind the scenes, the good guys are in charge, really. So, no need to worry.
What? We're going to hang all the partners at Goldman Sachs.
Well, that sounds more like wish fulfillment, and we'll get into that. So we're seeing this large-scale manipulation of the message, and at the same time, the public awareness is rising. So now we have all these stories out there, and they appear to be part of this awakening. But in fact, when we look a little closer, what they're doing is co-opting this wave of insight and polluting the information, in fact.
Right.
So whether that's on the financial manipulation of the markets, or UFOs, or political corruption, somehow they are switching the narrative out down this other path. So my question is, who is it that is doing this?
Well, I'm assuming that they're coming from a variety of I'm assuming that the intelligence agencies, both public and private, float these things and they see they've got lots of people on the payroll. It's the biggest job program in America, COINTELPRO, 20.0. And they float these things and they see what they can get traction and energy by. And they're developed around fear, fear, greed, and the need for emotional satisfaction. The reality is, if you look at what's happening, we're dealing with legal, financial, physical debasement across every aspect of our life. And it's very grinding. It's very, so dealing with that reality in the real world can be very unexciting.
Sure.
Okay? And what all of these things have, whether they hit our fear or our greed, is they have, we used to have a course at the university that I studied at called The Romance of Sex and Alcohol and Tobacco. They all have sex and romance to them, and they play on our desire for something a little more exciting and sacred than the debasement of what I call the slow burn. And one of the things they offer, whether they play the fear side or the greed side, is they play on people's desire for hope.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very tragic because, in fact, hope comes from facing reality and finding the pathway that can shift things. And if you're not prepared to deal with the nuts and bolts of reality, you're never going to find that path. You're going to go in these sort of cycles that never touch the train tracks. And that's part of the goals of this story, is they're trying to keep you from touching the train tracks of power and money. So it's, how can we keep everybody preoccupied while we control the train tracks? So do you know what the third rail is? You've got a subway system where you live.
Yes.
So the third rail is the train or the trolley runs on the tracks, and then the third rail carries the electricity. Well, they want to keep everybody away from the third rail.
I see.
They want to control the third rail, and whether it's the fear version or the greed version, they've got everybody going in circles which leaves them free to control the third rail.
That's interesting. And on some level, I expect that from the mainstream media, who really have only become much worse since they've been centralized into just 6 companies controlling the vast majority of news that we see.
Right.
But now we're seeing this COINTELPRO 2.0 factor creeping into the alternative media and ultimately rendering us powerless to act on that new information. It's also deliberately attempting to marginalize alternative media to the point where a reporter like me won't even want to be associated with it, the same way I don't want to be associated with the corporate media. So it's a very sophisticated op.
Right. I think, my experience has been in many respects the alternative media is worse than the corporate media.
Huh.
Although the corporate media is getting pretty ridiculous. So, the corporate media was always the official story, but it has only recently become what I call the shriekometer.
Right.
So, they've both become shriekometers. And I think part of it is that, whether it's the happy adult fairy tale or the fear adult fairy tale, hope sells and fear sells. Reality, is difficult and complicated and depressing sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
And to get something done in reality requires action. And that means dealing with the COINTELPRO that happens when you have weather, as you have weather problems when you start to take action. So reality is a lot harder. There's another dynamic that's going on too, Daniel, and that is, if I stick with adult fairy tales, then whether it's the problem or the solution, it's a stranger. A stranger is the problem, and a stranger is the solution. Okay, so we have, the Asian white dragon families are the savior, and they're going to solve us. Or E.T. is the Lone Ranger and is going to come down in his UFO and save us. There's no requirement to look at intimate responsibilities. The evil that we're dealing with in the U.S. system is very intimate, and we have to look at it because that's where our power comes from. But it is much more entertaining to engage with adult fairy tales. I think it appeals to the fear of what will happen if you face reality. Facing reality, the hardest thing a human being has to do is look in the mirror and say, I'm the patsy. I know, because I've had to do it. It's very hard. And, because then you have to go to work on the real thing. You have to change your behavior and habits. You need to try and network and collaborate with your family, your neighbors, your network, and try and change. You need to find the opportunity. I'll give you an example. The reason I took the position many years ago that we were going to slow burn and we weren't going to collapse is because I had a first-hand education in how the surveillance and manipulation and control works, because I dealt with the litigation. And I saw the depth of how the matrix is engineered, and that there is a matrix. I lived it. And I had to reverse engineer it by living it. And so I had a much deeper understanding of how the control works, because I had a very expensive opportunity, thank you to the Department of Justice. And what that taught me was a whole series of things. And when I tried to explain to financial people how the control worked, I literally heard, I try and explain control files and that everybody had a control file. And they would say, I can't talk about that. I can't go there because what you're telling me is it's hopeless.
Right.
And I would say it's not hopeless at all. But we have to bring transparency to this. We have to look at it. If we can't look at it, then it's hopeless. So we would get into this negative loop where they were telling me it was hopeless because they refused to look at the dark side. And I was trying to show them what the pathway was to break free of the whole control mechanism. And I was believing it was hopeless because they wouldn't go there.
Uh-huh.
So, and this is where, I feel like I've just spent 20 years in this loop.
I can appreciate that.
That's why, like dark journalists, you'll go there,
Definitely.
and we have to go there. We have to go there because the pathway to where we want to go, the dark side's not going to go away. So you bring transparency and you try and shift more and more into the light. That's what you try and do, but it's not going to go away.